If you want to play Magic the Gathering, then you're probably going to end up building decks. And if you like doing that, you might end up spending a lot of money. So this is my strategy to build decks for cheap with a theme or tribe that I enjoy without wasting all my money. Hi, McAllister with Toasty DIY, and today I'd like to go over my strategy for making decks the way that I think is just convenient and saves money and allows me to just kind of get them and proxy them if I like them or run them outright. But it's just more efficient in my opinion. So we're going to do this by going over a deck that I've created, a tribal merfolk island walking kind of deck, and we're going to go over how I think about it when I build a deck. And my goal is to give you 5 tips in order to build your decks and make them more consistent. So I'm going to load up this deck. Hi, me over here in the corner. I actually need to be over on that corner, so let me fly over here. All right, so this is a deck that I built a few days ago, and the idea of it is island walking and merfolk. I just like those, and it all really started when I noticed this card here existed. Other merfolk get 1/1 and have island walking. So the person can't block if they control an island. So if you're facing a blue deck, I'll probably need to make a sideboard for that. But otherwise, this deck just comes out the gate making people unblockable and wants to do that with as many merfolk as possible. So it's kind of wide, unblockable. I'm not hitting them with any big creature unless I make it to my late game beater. And that's pretty much it. So tip number 1 on how I build a deck is usually find your staple card, your card that starts your theme or gives you a creativity to build around it. And you may switch cards as you go through this. So I started out with just the idea of island walking being all I wanted. And I found this creature, the Tide Shaper, that gives you the ability to have him enter. And if the opponent controls an island, which you need them to for island walking, he gains 1/1. He can also convert the enemy's land to an island in addition to its other types, which means that he immediately becomes a 1-drop that you can drop instead for 2, and then he becomes then as a 2/2, which is, if you know the vanilla test, which will probably be one of my points, it passes. It means he comes in at a great value regardless. And the kicker's not much, so in a later game, you're probably going to be casting him for 2, and the fact he's a 2/2, it's great. So he's one of the ways to get our island walking trigger going. He's like very core. I imagine most island walking decks run this guy. With that, I'm going to go to tip number 2, which I kind of mentioned there, which is the vanilla test. Let's describe a card, theoretically, called a Merfolk Soldier. It's a 1-drop, 1/1. And there's a Merfolk Recruit, which is a 1-drop, 0/1. Which is better? Obviously the one that deals 1 damage versus the one that has no power. When it comes to a card, you can look at them and think, well, if I'm dropping it for 1, I would need to get at least 1 damage and 1 toughness out of it. If it's not dropping for at least 1/1, it needs to do something better. And if it is dropping for 1/1 already, if it does something better, it passes. It's better than just a vanilla card, a card that is just a Merfolk Soldier that has some flavor text, and it's a fun card for the thematics of Magic. But unless there's a interesting card interaction from another card, that card by itself is not very useful. So when you're building your deck, you need to look at things and make sure that if they are a lower power and toughness than their mana cost, that they're worth the reason. They're a good synergy piece. Tip number 3 is kind of pick what domain you're trying to be in. There's kind of this holy triforce, holy trinity of control, aggro, and tempo, with the idea being control is control the board so that you can get your board together. As I understand that, that's what control is. There's aggro, which is to come out swinging and just hit them. It's to kill them before the late game. And then there's tempo, which is to slowly build to the late game. So you're weaker early. Usually a tempo deck will lose to something that's like a good aggro deck, and a control deck will beat a good aggro deck. So it's kind of this bounce back and forth. They all intersect in some weird ways, but you can kind of look at where you're going to. So if you know if you're trying to win the late game by pulling out a late game beater, that's fine. You should always have a way to win in the late game, but the question is that the only place you win, or can you win on turn 4? But if your win condition on turn 5 is like this little combo piece and you're against a control deck, they're going to be wiping it out so they can get their pieces out safely and later. So it's kind of the idea you have to pick an area that you want to. So don't try to win at every portion of the game. Start with a deck that wins in one portion, and then as you play it, you'll learn why you're losing at different parts of the game and adapt. Just let that come later, but don't try to cover every bit at once. This deck that I'm building is meant to, around turn 3, start chipping them for 1 to 2 damage a turn, and then hopefully around 4 or 5, it becomes 5, 6 damage a turn, and it becomes progressively more until I've won. 2 damage is 10% of their health, so keep that in mind. Now, this is my tip. Tip number 3, never include a single copy of any card in your deck, especially if you have any sort of reliance on it. It's the problem of trying to crack sealed packs and play that makes me sad, is that if you're trying to play Modern where you construct your deck and you only have one copy of a legendary, it's just not worth banking on pulling that legendary. So I usually never build a deck around a legendary, because if I need to pull them and I have 4 of them in my deck, I'll pull them too often and then they'll disappear, they'll die. Unless I know my legendary is absolutely a target to be destroyed every time it enters the field, I'll never have more than 2 of them in a deck, because 2 gives me enough odds to draw it, but not so many that I draw 2 of them, and then I'm stuck with 2 legendaries that I can't play one of them because of the legendary rule. So if you're going to have a single copy of a card in your deck, usually it's worth foregoing to get better odds on a better card or on another card, because maybe you have a 2-drop that's really good and you only have 2 of them, and having that 3rd one would increase your odds of getting it every game, and that would be very, very good for you if it's a good core piece, because this game's a lot like Tetris in a way. You're lining up these pieces, and when you're trying to hit a Tetris, sometimes you're forced early to go ahead and drop like a 3-line, delete or point score. But you really want the 5, the perfect lineup, and you really want to draw these line pieces, these cards that really bring the combo, and they slot right in, and now it's activated. For this deck, it's clearly Master of the Pearl Trident, and if for some reason my person's very aware of that and they want to destroy it over and over again, I've built this deck with the idea of, since I only have 4 copies of one card to really push my deck to its next level, then I've made it where I have a lot of control because I need to protect that card. And if I'm not protecting that card, I need other ways to get around them. Tip number 4 to keep a deck cheap, easy to build. If you're trying to start out building and this is new to you, just use 23 to 25 lands. Actually, 23 to 24, I think is the proper area. You're still likely to get mana screwed, and you're still likely to get mana droughted, but ratio-wise, this is a good ratio to have, and you can go through and do it. If you're doing a dual-color deck, I highly recommend including snarls. There's a snarl for like every color duo, right? So for me, I run a Simic deck, which is blue-green for my frogs, and with that deck, the snarl is a blue-green that can enter the field untapped, which is very strong for a land that could be 2 colors, because most of them come in tapped. They usually give you a little benefit like 1 health or deal 1 damage to a player, which can be nice. The snarls come in, and they can come in flat, and if you draw them in your first hand, it gives you good opening for your deck coloring if you have a deck that is pretty split down the middle. I just think it's one of the best dual lands out there. There's possibly a better one, but I know they're cheap, and all you have to do is reveal that you have another land, which hopefully in your opening hand, you always have 1 to 2 more land drops. Unless you know what you're doing, 3 is usually a good thing to have, and less than that is scary, because you might get absolutely stuffed. Tip number 5, and let it be known, I'm a newer player, and my friends and I are newer players. I've been giving a lot of deck advice to them because I played card games in the past, so I have a little bit more knowledge than them, but there's way more people that know way more than me. Some of the things I've said during this video I think are great tips for a new player, not to enter competitive, but to have fun with your friends, is have a way to win the game. That may sound odd, may sound silly, but let's say you're doing a tokens deck that goes really wide, and you're just throwing a lot of tokens out, wide being, you have a lot of creatures you're attacking with instead of just a single 1 or 2 that hits really hard, is that when you build a deck, if you just build it out of cards you like, and you have a little theme, and you're like, I'm doing island walking across the board, and then you're at turn 15, and you're like, why am I dealing no damage? It's because you might not have included a good win con. So if you're doing tokens, like if you're green, include something like Preposterous Proportions. It seems like a crazy card. You don't need many of them, but if you have 5 tokens on board and they suddenly all become 10/10s with trample, it's pretty much game over, unless they have some very good way to block you or some fun counterspells or things like that. If you don't include a way to win, so in this deck, I've included the Creature Leviathan, or the Stormtide Leviathan. It has Island Walk. It makes all islands land, so it immediately becomes able to attack and be unblockable, and then it stops the enemy from attacking at all. So this is a threat that has to be removed, and if I'm at 8 mana, in theory, I should have 1 or 2 other merfolk out, so it means I'm swinging for an 8/8. They can't swing at all, but none of their blockers can block, so they're essentially useless. At that point, it's over. I have some card draw and other things to help this deck make sure that it can stay in tempo, but in reality, I need some way to win the game. I can chip them out, and Island Walk should be my way to win the game early if I just keep chipping, because I may not draw Stormtide Leviathan all game, and that's fine, because this guy will buff my people, and they will do this, and they will hit, and I have some good card draw built in, so if I do this, I get a draw a card, and if I do this, I get to draw a card after I deal damage, and I can't be blocked, because whenever I'm swinging for damage, in an ideal world, I'm swinging unblockable damage. So I have a way to win the game. Build your deck, Have your fun pet cards being ones that you just enjoy having, so you add them in your deck. That is totally cool. But if you're trying to play, I usually use the rule with my friends, kind of call this bonus tip. If you're gold fishing, which is, draw the cards, play by yourself, set up a life counter for the fake person you're playing, right? And if uninterrupted, you can't kill them on turn 5, like 50% of the times, you're probably not going to do well against somebody who can actually do it, who can actually fight, who can actually hit you. You need to be dealing damage. 20 damage is not that hard to hit. I mean, if on turn 1 you drop something that can deal 2 damage, you're dealing 2 damage, 10% of their health. And if you can just do that, if you did that 5 more times, you deal 20 damage, or you deal 10 damage, right? As long as you drop one other creature that does maybe 3 damage and you hit them on that, you should be fine. You hit them on a normal curve, you're going to do great. Unless you're winning with a weird mechanic like mill or whatever. And even on mill, you can pretty much burn them out in turn 5 if you want to. If you have the right setup, you get your 2 Hedron Crab hits, you hit them with an Archive Trap. You also do something maybe like a Fractured Sanity. You could do it. So turn 5, turn 6, you should be winning consistently against somebody who doesn't fight back. If you can't win against someone who doesn't fight back on turn 5 or 6, you're doing something wrong, in my opinion. I don't think it's a deck that's going to be healthy to play against your friends, because you're going to end up losing a lot. Or your deck's made to make them mad by preventing the game from being won. It's kind of like that Lantern Control idea. If you watch Ristic's study video, it's really great. But in reality, that deck, the Lantern Control, I think they say the goal of the game is to not play the game, to make the person just give up. That's a weird kind of win con, and I think for an early game deck builder, you should be looking to win on turn 5 or 6 consistently. I think if you can't win on 5, lethal should happen on 6, because they're going to try to stop you, and if you can't kill somebody who's not blocking, then you can't kill somebody who definitely is. So give that a test. Hope this helped. Thank you all for watching this video. It was just something to go over. This deck, I've had it on screen for a while, so you can copy it if you like. I think it's pretty interesting. Lets you tutor for creatures, lets you gain. You can go wide or tall depending on how it goes, but more than likely you're going to be attacking for unblockable. So if you're playing like a red deck, you're going to make them cost a lot more to play any spells, because you have like Spell Pierce and Counter Spell. So it's honestly one where you want to play with 2 mana, always untapped. In my opinion, it's better to just take those early hits and then just rack up these people that can just not be blocked. No way you let them drop a 1 cost for free. If they want to hit you with the Bolt Lightning, Spell Pierce it, I think that'll be fun. To be honest, I haven't got to play this against people, but once I do, I'm going to get a chance. Merfolk has a lot of support, and I'll go through and update the deck, maybe with the sideboard to fix it, depending on what I'm going against. So thank you all for watching. Comments down below, and if you have any video concepts you want me to do over Magic, let me know. I enjoy it. Thank you. Peace.